Ladies and gentlemen, there's still a lot to talk about. So let's move on to the second panel discussion, which will cover support for the IB ecosystem. Please allow me to welcome our next moderator, Ms. Anita Ahmad, the Head of Community Development from the Hasanah Foundation, Malaysia. A little bit about our moderator's background. Ms. Anita is currently the Head of Community Development and Humanitarian Disaster Relief in Hasanah Foundation. She strategizes and implements community-based socio-economic interventions with civil society organization partners in low-income urban and rural areas, as well as coordinates with government-linked companies and NGOs in responding to humanitarian needs. She has over 20 years of experience in different capacities in the non-profit sector, including in the United Nations Development Programme in Malaysia and an NGO, Mercy Malaysia. At the UN, she supported the government of Malaysia in developing and advocating policies on gender equality, as well as the rights of indigenous people and persons with disabilities. At Mercy, she coordinated and implemented humanitarian projects in Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Syria, and Jordan, among others. In 2017, Ms. Anita was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship and the John S. Wolfe Fellowship, during which at the time she spent 2 months in the United States understanding different organizations' approaches to community development. She holds a master's degree in social development, awarded under the Chevening Scholarship, and a bachelor's degree in law from the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start, I would like to inform the participants that should you have questions throughout the sessions, you are welcome to post them in the Q&A box provided. We shall try our best to get the panelists to address the questions by the end of the session. I am now pleased to pass the floor to Ms. Anita to invite and introduce our panelists for this session. Ms. Anita, over to you.
Thank you very much, Intan, for that introduction, and a very good morning to everybody listening in today. I'm really happy to be part of this forum today, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two speakers. But before that, maybe a short introduction about this session. We'll be exploring a little bit more about the ecosystem that supports inclusive business, because as we know, while we understand, and especially for those of us listening here, that inclusive business is important, it does and can make an impact on the different marginalized communities and those who are not able to access certain support. So we want to understand what does the ecosystem really look like in supporting the growth and scaling of inclusive business. And it gives me great pleasure to have two speakers today. Firstly, I'll introduce to you Marcus Dietrich, who is the Director of Policy Inclusive Business Action Network, otherwise known as IBAN. So he has been the Director of Policy since 2017. He supports companies to scale up their inclusive business models and policymakers in the development of enabling environments. So something that we'll be talking a lot more about today, the enabling environments for inclusive businesses. He has a background in the private sector, upon which he moved to the Philippines in 2008. And has consulted with the Asian Development Bank, renewable energy and inclusive business. Quite interestingly, he himself is also a social entrepreneur because he co-founded the Hill Tribe Organics in Thailand, which engages in Hill Tribe communities in organic farming. He holds a degree in business studies from CAS or CASS Business School and a master's degree in international community economic development from Southern New Hampshire University. So welcome to our panel today, Marcus. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Mr. Muhammad Shahriza Sulaiman, who is the Deputy Director, Policy Monitoring and Inclusive Development Division for SME Corp here in Malaysia. He is currently the Deputy Director on Policy, and prior to that, his career was very much in the marketing sector. As a scholarship recipient of the New Straits Times Malaysia Berhad, his career began in 1995 in marketing at this leading newspaper company in Malaysia. In 2000, he joined a government think tank, the Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, otherwise known as ICIM, and was responsible in organizing many conferences and seminars under various topics at the national, regional, and as well as international levels here. He then served as a researcher at IQ Center for Economic and Social Studies, publishing several academic publications and columnist of. He was also columnist of newspaper articles. He was also featured as a forum panelist speaker in many talk shows in the electronic media in the field of marketing and consumerism. In 2005, he joined the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Corporation, SMEDEC, a government agency later known as SME Corp, which is who he represents today, in Malaysia and serving in different capacities. He has been involved in the initiation of inclusive business in Malaysia since its inception through strategic collaboration for the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, otherwise known as UNESCAP, and also IBAN. So without further ado, let me go on with the, some of the questions now that we have done the introduction. I think we will look forward to some interesting discussions because we get to hear some regional perspectives as well as some local perspectives here. Maybe I'll start with you, Marcus. IBAN has been working on supporting the growth of inclusive businesses for over 7 years in both the Asian and African region. Maybe you could share with us today, what are your key observations with regard to the inclusive business ecosystem? Have you seen it evolve over the years? Is it sufficient? And perhaps you can share some of your key observations on this. Thank you.
Hey, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's actually an anniversary for me, an anniversary year. It's in 2012 when I started to be introduced to inclusive business for the first time. This is when I undertook an inclusive business landscape study for the Asian Development Bank in the Philippines. And yesterday we launched the report of 10 years of inclusive business in the Philippines. And I'm very happy to say that the result has been overwhelming. The companies that we had identified 10 years ago have grown, not only their impact, but also their economic well-being. So the promise of inclusive business, that it delivers economic growth for the companies as well as social impact at scale, has materialized. And in one sector, we could even see a systemic impact as a whole industry has been transformed as a microinsurance business, which now in the Philippines is offered to half of the population. And with this growth that we have seen, we have also seen a growth in the ecosystem. While it was a niche a concept 10 years ago with very little support, we could see that with Asian Development Bank, IB initiative led by Dr. Armin Bauer at that time, created that spark that rippled through ASEAN and some of the APEC countries as well. So what have we observed? We've observed that the ecosystem has become much broader and much deeper. And very much we can see two different kinds of ecosystem developing, depending on the socioeconomic status of the economies. But let me just go back a little bit. What do we mean by ecosystem? The ecosystem has been sort of described by the G20 in 2015, focusing on 4 core support functions that are required for inclusive business to prosper. These are rules and regulation done by the governments, of course, but also by private sector, for example, through standards. We have information about the base of the pyramid, which is not a very well researched or market researched area, but also for inclusive businesses or companies that want to go into this market. We need financial resources, the access to finance, and capacity development for the BOP, but also for the companies. So it's always been like on these two levels, the base of the pyramid support as well as the companies. What we could observe is that over the years, the sort of upper economies, upper income economies have focused more on the social enterprise approach within their economies. Social enterprises target marginalized communities, be it the youth, elderly, disabled people, handicapped, and others, and have built a very strong network of support for such company delivering services that, for example, a government could not or did not want anymore to deliver. So we've seen this in, for example, in Australia, a very strong social enterprise scene that efficiently and effectively delivers such welfare mechanisms. On the other hand, in the lower income and lower and middle income countries, we've seen inclusive businesses that address the majority of the population, which is poor and low income. And here we've seen also a growth in the ecosystem. More and more funding has been made available. Globally, we've got now over 1.1 trillion US dollars asset under management for impact investment, which includes inclusive business, but also like many other areas such as the environment. We've seen rules and regulations appearing to support inclusive business, and we will hear later more about Malaysia, but there are also other countries that have done more. Information is available more and more about these groups, as well as capacity development through many activities, through business associations, on business coaching and mentoring, but also globally through inclusivebusiness.net, for example. So overall, it's been a great journey, and we have a much more stable and much more professional ecosystem now as we had 10 years ago.
Right. Thank you, Marcus. So thank you for explaining ecosystem that way, that there's 4 different areas. I really wanted to talk about rules and regulations, because you did mention that it's much better now. And then, but also, which I would assume, and as you alluded to, that it would be the government's role. But you also talked about the private sector's role for rules and regulation. Perhaps you could expand that a little bit more, because I think I wonder whether the private sector also are playing an active role in supporting this ecosystem, and what have they done in order to do so? Perhaps you can share some examples that you know of.
Yeah, like from the public sector point of view, we've seen that ASEAN has taken a regional lead since 2017. ASEAN has put inclusive business on their agenda through the Philippine presidency at the time. And the Philippines was also the first one to put a policy instrument into place with the inclusive business incentive mechanism at the Board of Investment. We have then seen many other countries, such as Cambodia, that is now the front runner. That's why I mentioned it here, with their national inclusive business strategy. We have Vietnam, which has a, for me, like fascinating and forward-looking approach in integrating inclusive business into their sustainability, national sustainability strategy. So Vietnam is viewing sustainability not only in terms of environment, but also in terms of social sustainability. And in this program for the support of sustainability for SMEs, where they plan to bring or support 10,000 SMEs on their pathway to sustainability, inclusive business is a definite part on it. From the private sector point of view, we have business associations that are advocating for inclusive business, that provide business coaching. We also have, in some instances, standards that are being developed that are supporting inclusive business. For example, we have quite a few inclusive businesses that are working in the organic agriculture. And there is the private sector that sets the rules and regulations for this. And there we also then need the interplay between the public and the private sector. The private sector has developed those rules, but it is also the government that needs then to enforce that. It's something that I'm experienced personally with the social enterprise Hill Tribe Organics in Thailand, where we have organic certification, but in the supermarkets, everybody can print organic on their packaging. So the customer cannot distinguish between the one that are certified and the one that are not certified. So this is where more work needs to be done, a closer collaboration between the public and the private sector.
Thank you for that. And do you think that this is the inclusive business that the private sector is supporting? Is this also supporting the aspirations for the ESG? Is this something that's why they're getting more and more involved in this? Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is where inclusive business is riding on this huge wave of the mega themes, right? Starting with the SDGs of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also, of course, ESG. ESG is being driven by the investors, and it's taken a very much a life on its own, and a huge life, because it's something that everybody in the financial industry is monitoring very closely. They have a lot of teething problems at the moment. There's a lot of greenwashing, social washing going on, but we can see that this whole impact management and measurement has started also from the grassroots. There were private organizations like GRI and others who developed standards. There's voluntary disclosure from companies, but now the regulators are taking over and trying to steer it. And there's this International Sustainable Standards Board led by the former Danone CEO, Emmanuel Faber, who's bringing it all together and harmonizing it on a global standard. And we've seen a big drive from the stock exchanges here in the APEC regions, who are putting ESG as a requirement. And this also translates then into investments. We've seen Temasek of Singapore investing $500 million in an impact investment fund. So this is what I meant by the access to finance. This pie is growing, and inclusive business has a good opportunity to tap into this growing fund.
But do you think there are any challenges for, we talk about working at the BOP level, right? So that's quite a very low level of the pyramid. So, and then you talked about capacity development. So what are the different stages of capacity development that would be needed for an inclusive business to be able to scale up their business and really access that funding that's available? Because I see that can be some of the challenges in terms of the step-by-step movement towards that. Do you have any views on that? Is it getting easier to access that kind of funding? Is more needed to support this kind of access to funding for a growing inclusive business?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a much more, what do you say, like professionalism in this access to finance. The investors are very demanding. They're not only demanding the story of a nice social impact, but they're expecting very hard numbers in terms of financial results, projections, but also in the impact management and measurement. But while their demands are there and are rising, the supply of inclusive business for the they've also stepped up to the task, and we've got organizations like the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, who is offering such support for the investors, but also bringing in the companies. We've seen business associations that are stepping up. In Cambodia, we have supported piloting a business coaching and mentoring course especially for inclusive business, which is now being ready to scale out into the region. And then I think by showing this professionalism on terms of the in regards to the inclusive businesses, they are becoming more attractive to the investors, because in theory, like conceptually, they are spot on, because they say it's a core business operation, it's at scale or scalable. So it has that growth story that every investor is looking for. Impact management measurement is part of the key features of an inclusive business. But certainly there's still a gap, because like the majority or the number one barrier to growth has been found out for inclusive business is the access to finance. So definitely there is still a gap that needs to be bridged through innovative mechanisms. For example, something again that we piloted in the conceptualized in the ASEAN region, but also we're discussing in the African context, where inclusive business is also being explored, is a risk reduction facility, which is sort of a public-private venture where the risk for the investor is being reduced, and enables them to bring in their private funding through this leverage of such a facility.
Right. Thank you for that, Marcus. I mean, that's quite interesting. So we've talked a little bit about some of the regional trends, and zooming into one of the different components of the ecosystem that's required to support inclusive business. I think now, Marcus, we'll move on to Mr. Muhammad Shahriza, and we'll zoom in a little bit into Malaysia, because Malaysia is playing host to this forum. So, Mr. Shahriza, perhaps you could give a bit of a landscape of the inclusive business in Malaysia, a bit of background, like when it's all started, and what is SMEs Corp's role to offer, micro enterprises as well as peer communities to generate income within the idea of inclusive business. Over to you, Mr. Shahriza.
Thank you, Ms. Anita. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good day, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all our audience. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. So maybe I would like to introduce SME Corp Malaysia. So we are an agency under the Ministry of Entrepreneur and Cooperatives Development Malaysia. So SME Corp Malaysia has been involved and has been tasked to undertake the works on promoting and advocating inclusive business in this country. So how did we start? Ms. Anita was asking. So we started in quite early back, maybe in 2018, but the groundwork has been done together with the UNESCO and also IBAN, starting from 2019 onwards. And actually, as a background, inclusive business is very recently introduced in the Malaysian business landscape, whereby we have just launched our program, which is a pilot program only this year. But before that, we have already undertaken a study, which is the landscape study on inclusive business in Malaysia, commissioned by the government of Malaysia, starting from 2019, and it was published in 2021. It was in collaboration with UNESCO and also IBAN. So how did it happen? Because that we think that inclusive business is very pertinent and very relevant to the business landscape in Malaysia in terms of public and private sectors partnership. All this while, you know that Malaysia is a high middle income country, whereby we have in place mechanisms, initiatives, support programs for the bottom of pyramid community. But in advancing the agenda further, I think that we must not only depend on the government only, because what happened recently during the pandemic of COVID-19, over the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, this is the third year. So what happened was a lot of facilities and assistance was given by the government to assist the affected community. Mostly they are the bottom of pyramid, and we define them under the B40 group, which means bottom 40% percentile of household income earners. So what is defined by B40 in Malaysia is that the group of household with a monthly income of less than 4,850 ringgit, which is currently equivalent to around 1,080 US dollar. Then this covers about 2.91 million households in Malaysia. So when they are affected, so a lot of assistance has to be given out by the government. And looking at the theme of our program, which is the APEC Inclusive Business Workshop, we want to share prosperity through inclusivity. So we want to chart the path for shared prosperity through inclusivity. What do we mean by that? Is because we want the private sector involvement to be there, and it can be institutionalized through the policy, through the initiatives which are undertaken through government bodies. So in our case, APEC Malaysia has been involved since 2018 onwards until now in the workings of introduction of IB in the Malaysian business landscape. And currently we are working towards propagating and promoting and advocating this concept of business, which is relatively very new in the Malaysian landscape. And I think most of our audience who are listening today, our participants are also getting to know about how does it work as a business model. At the same time, what we have in offer in Malaysia, which I will be sharing in a little while. So I think that overall, Malaysia is undertaking the Inclusive Business Initiative now under the auspices of the Ministry of Entrepreneur and Cooperative Development through APEC Malaysia, as we find that government intervention cannot be for all the while or every time. It has to be a hand-in-glove situation. We work together with the private sector. But as I have mentioned that working with UNSCAP before this and IBAN to undertake the study. So we use the framework from the study, the landscape study, to actually come up with a model which suits our current situation and requirement in the economy. So I would like also to touch upon the another initiative which has been recently launched by our ministry, which is the blueprint, the SE or Social Enterprise Blueprint. We call it the Malaysia Social Entrepreneurship Blueprint 2030. So this is a target of over 8 years to achieve a pool of critical mass of social entrepreneurs. So social entrepreneurship now is being promoted as a blueprint, which has a target until 2030. So what does it have to do with IB or inclusive business? We look at social entrepreneurship as being the start or the funnel for many more companies or many more businesses to be ready to go to the next level, which is the inclusive business. Because right now, Malaysia has come up with this plan, with this blueprint, and we want to produce the critical mass of social enterprises, and we want to build a cohesive and holistic ecosystem for everybody, the players, to be supported. So from this blueprint, we think that it's only a natural progression for the social enterprises. Once they are ready to become an IB. So what we are planning to do is we are going to work together, under the ministry and the associations with the chambers of the social enterprises and such. So we want to work together with them to promote IB later once we have a good pool of social enterprises which are ready to graduate to the next level. So I'm just sharing this Malaysia Social Entrepreneurship Blueprint 2030, or in short, we call it SEMAI 2030, so that the direction that has been set by the government of Malaysia right now is put into the right perspective. Yep. And why we start IB right now as a pilot project on a small scale, because we have yet to advocate and promote it to the larger audience in Malaysia. So I think with that, I shall maybe continue in a little while. Ms. Anita, if you would like to ask for the question.
Sure. I mean, it's quite interesting because I think Marcus talked about that there are two different approaches to inclusive business, right? You can go through the social entrepreneurship approach, which he said that higher income countries tend to be focused on, and he mentioned Australia, whereas lower income tends to be focused on inclusive businesses. But it looks like in Indonesia it's a two-pronged approach. Is that correct, Encik Shahrizal? Because even I think as part of your pilot that you launched a few months ago, because Hasana Foundation also attended and was part of that, you chose two different types of partners, businesses, and I think they'll be speaking next after this. So it looks like am I correct to say that it's a two-pronged approach? And perhaps you could share a little bit what are the different strategies for these two-pronged approaches, because you partnered with Masala Wheels, I believe, as your representative to work with social enterprise, but also you've partnered with companies like Farm Fresh, which we will hear. So maybe you'd like to expand a bit more on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ms. Anita. I would agree that it is a two-pronged approach, because we are looking for companies which ready or existing models, which actually they are into the IB in practice, but maybe IB as a business model, as a concept, as an approach has not been introduced very widely in the country. So what we do is we identify, we select, and then we work together. We appoint a few companies which are under different categories. Yeah, like what has been mentioned by Ms. Anita. Ms. Anita is also from Hasana Foundation, which is our partner in promoting social enterprise and also IB at the same time, yeah, through our common platform. So what we do is we identify those which are already operating as an IB, but they have not, prior to this, they don't have the knowledge that they are actually an IB. So how do you identify them? Because through our engagements with companies like Farm Fresh, for instance, is not a SME, it's not a small, medium enterprise, but they are very big, and now they are a public listed company. Yeah, of course they started small, yeah, more than a decade ago, but we were listening to them right after this session. So how did we identify them as an IB? Actually, Farm Fresh started small when they wanted to have a steady supply of fresh milk, yeah, to be produced into fresh milk products. Yeah, before this, they only started with the fresh milk, but not the UHT milk, yeah, like in the picture. But we identify them as they have worked with the small farmers, those with cattle, yeah, those who rear cows. So to get the supply of milk, they had to buy under their own initiative, because they had to compete with the larger players, yeah, the big names, the multinational corporations, MNCs. So they had to compete by getting the supply of fresh milk from these small farmers with a higher than market price. So they did that in the first place in the Malaysian landscape. So when they wanted to have a consistent supply of fresh milk, they had to buy it at higher than market price, so that the farmers can actually sell to them. If they go into the normal pricing, they wouldn't have had the supply from these small farmers or anywhere else, since they only are interested in supplying to the big players. Yeah, so that's how they did their business. And over time, over the years, they had more investment. Yeah, and then they opened their own farms, and now they have a lot of many farms, and also many cows, and they now shift into another perspective of IB, which is to grow and develop the B40, yeah, the one that I said just now, the bottom 40% percentile of household income in Malaysia. Among them are the housewives, yeah, the homemakers, single mothers. So they develop these people to become home dealers. Home dealers, what I mean by that is that they operate from home. They get the stock of the farm fresh milk, and then they can sell it, yeah, first as a part-time, and then most of them earn a good income, yeah, and then they do it more like a full-time. So we identified this company, Farm Fresh, as a very good company with a high potential to even sustain the IB model that they've started before actually we started working with them. So why Farm Fresh is because they have a very good growth in terms of market share, in terms of the fresh milk, and also overall dairy product market share in Malaysia. They started small, but now they are the leading player in the industry. So that's Farm Fresh. We also work with another company. Yeah, I would like to also mention about Serai Malaya. Serai is lemongrass in Malay language. Yeah, Serai is lemongrass. So what happened here is that this company actually we were introduced with the parent company, which is StarMedic. Yes, StarMedic, they produce medical devices. They have a subsidiary which is called they were doing essential oil. Yeah, so essential oil extracted from the lemongrass or serai. So they were at the time in engaged with SME Corp Malaysia in terms of expanding their facility. You can look at the photo here on the top left corner. So that is their factory, their facility. So they wanted to buy more premise to expand their business, yeah, in terms of producing lemongrass extract to produce the essential oil. So they were interested in doing that, but somehow we identify them, and when we have a good communication and negotiation with them, we are able to persuade and convince them that they should be working with the community to supply the lemongrass consistently. And by doing so, they are supporting the community. The community are also going to supply with them all their lemongrass. So what they harvest, they can produce in a big quantity by the tons, and then they can supply to Serai Malaya, so that both parties can benefit from each other. So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement that Serai Malaya will have a consistent supply, and the farmers, the village people, yeah, they work with right now 5 communities can sell to Serai Malaya. And one interesting aspect of this project is that that company actually, which started off as StarMedic, yeah, they opened a special subsidiary called Serai Malaya, which is for the lemongrass supply and management, you know, in terms of the stock getting from the village people and such. So these two are the project that we want to highlight. Other than that, we also have other companies at the SME level, yeah, like what has been mentioned, Masala Wheels, they do the cloud kitchen, they train the less privileged community, those who are left behind in the community, to actually prepare food which can be delivered to their online platform. So this is also done. And there is another company, Most Wells and Berhad, which also trains the B40 group in terms of creative sewing and producing works like handicrafts, clothing, and such. So we work with a variety of companies because we want to test the state of readiness, and then we want to see how it can be achieved with different categories of company, be it public listed, be it medium-sized company, or even a small company. So that's how we started off with the Inclusive Business Value Chain Development Initiative, or IBVCDI pilot project for this year. And we will move on with this for recruitment of maybe more companies. Yeah, right now we are working with 4 for the year.
Thank you very much for that, Shariza. I look forward to seeing where all initiatives 10 years down the line, because as Marcus said, like Philippines, they celebrated their 10th anniversary and they've seen the positive growth. So I'm sure you'll see the same. And I think it's quite interesting that we are piloting by supporting different initiatives. We only have 4 more minutes to our session. So I would like to open the floor to our listeners to ask any questions in the Q&A box. There was actually one question for me, but I'm not going to answer it because it's not got to do with inclusive business. But just very quickly, yes, as Hasana Foundation does work on mental health, but you can look at our website, so I don't want to distract from the topic. But perhaps let's see if we have any questions from the floor. If not, I'll perhaps ask some questions and just double check. Not so far. Surely some of our audience are curious. Any burning questions that you'd like to find out from the regional perspective or the Malaysian perspective? No? Okay, let me just perhaps finish up the session with 2 last questions, one for Marcus and one for Mr. Shariza. So Marcus, just wondering, like, what do you think the ecosystem needs to support companies with an IB model to sustain and scale their efforts, and what else can they do? Is it enough of what the ecosystem is doing, or can there be more support? So your last words, perhaps. Just wanted to feedback on that question.
Of course, like always, more can be done, and it can be done better. And for this, it is important to share ideas. That's why I congratulate Malaysia of staging this APEC workshop on inclusive business. We recently supported ASEAN in the 5th ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit, and the next ASEAN chair, Indonesia, is already committed to the 6th ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit. By sharing in this region and within APEC, new developments, innovative approaches, and then go back to your to the own economy and build in those innovations, will further strengthen the ecosystem. I think that's a great power of such organizations, and we see more money coming in. We see these mega trends favoring inclusive business, and with this, the support will increase. I'm 100% sure that when we meet again in 10 years' time, that by then maybe what the Philippines has imagined in 2017, that IB is the new paradigm of doing business, has actually come true.
Hopefully it'll be sooner in Malaysia, because I think the way the SME Corp is doing is that they're looking at existing business who are actually doing it but not realizing it. So I think that's a great start, so that you don't have to wait for 10 years, right? Mr. Shariza. So Mr. Shariza, perhaps your last words, what would you like to see in the ecosystem, especially in Malaysia, doing to support the growth of inclusive business, and what else can it do, and how can it work together with SME Corp in doing so?
Yeah, I would anticipate that in the years to come, IB could be the trend for businesses, so that they can actually transition. Right now is the period of promotion, advocacy, so we want more people, more companies, more players, and even people on the ground to know about how IB works. And if it is proven as a mutually beneficial to both businesses and the community, I'm sure that many people will be more interested in getting on board the IB in their respective businesses. Because as we know that IB doesn't require the transformation of the whole business, but it can be a business line or product line or something part of your company operations. It's not necessarily that you have to convert the whole company to becoming an IB. So what we aspire next is that we want to see more players which maybe can involve the larger companies, especially in Malaysia. We have our, of course, the MNCs. We have large companies. We have medium-sized companies, and we also have the government-linked companies. So if they can work in tandem with SME Corp Malaysia in supporting the IB agenda and initiative, it will benefit the recovery post pandemic recovery that we really seek right now. Because you know that IB is a private public partnership initiative, so it will benefit more people through the participation and involvement of not only funding from the government but also the private sector. So right now, like what SME Corp Malaysia is doing is that we are not supporting these companies which I have already explained just now, like the 4 companies, the 4 pilot project IB principal companies that have been identified. But we are channeling our funding for the benefit of the community, which are the micro enterprises and the B40 or inclusive community, which include the women, the youth, the disabled, the underprivileged, and even the indigenous people. So what we want to work with next is to find more of these companies which are willing to commit themselves, because IP, I think, is a long-term commitment. It's not just a one-off, like today we are doing pilot project with Farm Fresh or Serai Malaya. Maybe for next year they are no longer an IB, but we don't want that to happen. We want to create more and more companies which are really willing to work together for the benefit of the society, not being their employee, but working with the community to become part of the supply chain of the company. So supply or value chain is very important, because we know that once the company can sustain its operation by including the community as part of its value chain, then of course the community itself can flourish. So this is part of the approach which can be undertaken to alleviate poverty and those at the bottom of the pyramid, BOP. And I think we also at the same time would like to see that more SMEs are also being given opportunity and being prepared to be part of the value chain of the larger companies or the MNCs, for instance. Because it's very important, if we can identify the micro enterprises especially, which can be assisted under our various schemes and programs. So we are looking at a synergy. So it's a survival of the big companies, the larger players, and also the smaller ones. So we are not talking about just the community itself, but also the micro enterprises which can also be involved on board the value chain of the IB company, which can be larger. So I think that's how that we want to work in the next phase, and we want to do it through the pull factor. So we don't want to push, but we want to pull, so that when more companies, when more business owners are interested, they can see the benefit of working with certain community. Because in Malaysia, we have a rural community in most of the states. There are states which earn less income compared to the rest, which are less developed. So if more companies can do that for their own community, for their local community, then the community and the economy of the locality will of course be developed better than through solely government intervention or assistance.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we've got over time, and I think we have participants who are on standby to already hear the next session. But thank you very much for that input, and certainly Hasanah Foundation also, we are also on the same trajectory because we work with the similar groups of BOP. So we look forward to also working in close collaboration with SME Corp on that. Just to conclude, I think that was a very interesting discussion. I think that nicely leads to the next panel. I thank both Marcus as well as Sarija for your answers and your interesting inputs to this topic. Thank you very much, and over to you, Intan.